Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
أهلا بكم إلى نشرة الأخبار.
An Israeli official confirmed that the anticipated meeting between the Israeli Prime Minister and the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas next Sunday has been cancelled. In another development, Israeli helicopter gunships continued to pound the cities of Gaza and Khan Yunis in the south of the Gaza Strip. Hamas movement renewed its commitment to the cooling-off period. Amidst the assassination of their military wing leader, the Jihad al-Islami movement vowed to step up its resistance against the Israeli occupation.
Tens of thousands of Palestinians took to the streets in the city of Rafah to pay respect to the leader of Al-Quds Brigade, the military wing for Al-Jihad al-Islami, whose leader, Mohammed al-Sheikh Khalil, was assassinated. An Israeli helicopter launched a missile targeting Khalil's vehicle, killing him and an accomplice in Gaza. Some protesters discharged ammunition into the air and chanted slogans calling for retaliation.
Our mission will take a new approach. We will not only execute martyred suicide operations. God willing, new techniques of killing will be implemented to teach the Zionist entity a lesson for the assassination of Mohammed al-Sheikh Khalil.
The political leaders of Al-Jihad al-Islami confirmed that they will not abandon their legitimate right to self-defense, rendering the cooling-off period void, especially as Israel continues its policy of assassinations against prominent Palestinian leaders.
It is not a good time to talk about the cooling-off period. We need to talk about the obvious escalation in the Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people. As Palestinians, we must stop this campaign of violence against our people. We must not go down on our knees against the Zionist attacks. If the Palestinians bow down, it means that Sharon accomplished his goals.
Hamas movement surprisingly declared a ceasefire, confirming that they will stop launching missile attacks against Israel from within the Gaza Strip. However, they vowed that they will resume their military struggle and resistance should Israel continue its aggression against the Palestinians.
Our commitment to the ceasefire is based on Israel's commitment. If the occupation resumes its aggression, the Hamas movement will not stand still. Once again, we will respect the truce as long as Israel is committed to it.
Hamas's decision of the ceasefire did not prevent Israel from carrying out a series of military raids as helicopter gunships continued to pound different areas of the Gaza Strip, causing significant property damage. Despite the fact that Hamas agreed to stop carrying out military operations from Gaza, Israel continues its aggression. However, Al-Jihad al-Islami vowed that they will retaliate for the assassination of their military wing leader, Mohammed al-Sheikh Khalil, whereas Palestinian Authority pleaded with all Palestinian factions not to give Sharon further justification of accomplishing his goals.
Israel launched multiple missile strikes in Gaza overnight and into this morning, in the worst surge of violence since the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza almost 2 weeks ago. Israeli aircraft had attacked at least 5 targets throughout the Gaza Strip, including a metal workshop and buildings used by Palestinian activists. Although Hamas group yesterday said it was halting attacks on Israel following the missile strikes, not all factions have followed suit. Hamas leader Mahmoud al-Zahar announced his group's decision shortly after Israel killed an Islamic Jihad leader in a resumption of its policy of targeting Palestinian activists for assassination. He said such a decision would ensure the safety of Palestinians in Gaza. But as the Palestinian Authority welcomed Hamas's announcement, the Israeli government remained skeptical.
We are committing to Cairo agreement. We are calling our militant group to stop their activities against the Israeli occupation outside Gaza Strip. The second point, according to the internal Palestinian agreement, we are calling for making an end all the militant nature of the celebration due to the withdrawal of the Israeli from the Gaza Strip.
We welcome the recent positive response of some factions, including Hamas, to abide by the ceasefire, and we hope that the United States and the Quartet will make the necessary efforts to convince Israel also to abide by the ceasefire and to end its continuous attacks on Palestinians.
It's just so important that the Palestinian leadership do what it promised to do, and that is disarm Hamas.
In the West Bank city of Hebron, hundreds of Palestinians took to the streets, calling on Israel to release Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. Holding pictures of their loved ones and waving Palestinian flags, men and women appealed for the release of the prisoners. Some mothers participating in the rally said they haven't seen their jailed children for several years now, as Israel denied them visits for security reasons. The last time Israel released Palestinian prisoners was in June, in what they said was a gesture aimed at boosting Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. But Palestinians complained the released prisoners had almost completed their sentences.
IDF's quick and tough response to this weekend's Qassam rocket and mortar attacks coming out of the Gaza Strip is the reason Hamas has decided to rethink its terror tactics. That's the widely held view of most Knesset members who support a zero-tolerance policy to terrorism.
There is no other way. The decision of running away from Gaza gave a great new motivation to terror, and we'll have to fight strong and to pay a high price now for putting the terrorist activity to a lower level than it's going to reach because of the disengagement.
There's another reason. They want to play a political game. The Hamas, they can't go on. Their own people will not let them go on with the missiles because they understand that Israel reacts and then they have to stop it.
Israeli Air Force gunships, as we reported, pummeled terrorist targets in Gaza early today. This despite a Hamas announcement last night that it is halting its Gaza-based rocket attacks on Israel. We get more on this report by IBA's Dan Diker.
The army continued its Gaza offensive this morning against Palestinian targets in the Gaza cities of Khan Yunis, Rafah, and Beit Hanun. Army gunships attacked at least 5 targets, destroying a Gaza metal workshop and several textile warehouses used to manufacture and store weaponry. The Israeli attacks also knocked out power on the eastern side of Gaza City. No injuries were reported. In the southern Gaza Strip, Israeli aircraft fired missiles at suspected weapons manufacturing plants used by Hamas and the Fatah's Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades. Palestinian officials said that the missiles landed in an open field. The Israeli army said that it also targeted an access road used to launch Qassam missiles at Israel. It appears that the intensity of Israel's counterattacks brought the Hamas leadership last night to announce a halt for the time being to its rocket attacks on Israel. Meanwhile, tensions continue between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. Angry Hamas gunmen opened fire late last night on the home of PA Interior Ministry spokesman Tawfiq Abu Qussa. Abu Qussa was at home at the time but escaped injury. Hamas has branded Abu Qussa a traitor for blaming the radical Palestinian group and not Israel for a deadly Gaza explosion last week that killed some 19 Palestinians. PA Interior Minister Nasser Youssef charged that it was a Hamas weapons accident that triggered the explosion. Israel has denied any involvement. Meanwhile, the Islamic Jihad today vowed to avenge the IDF's assassination last night of Sheikh Mohammed Khalil, a senior Hamas commander in the Gaza Strip. Large crowds of Palestinians flooded Gaza streets to mourn the terrorist leader. Israel says that Khalil was responsible for the murder of former Gaza settler Tali Khatuel and her 4 daughters, among other terrorist atrocities. Declaring that there is no talk of a truce, only room for war. The Islamic Jihad leadership vowed that the retaliation against Israel will take place deep inside what they called the Zionist enemy's territory. Dan Diker, IBA News.
Despite the continuing tensions in Gaza and fears of renewed rocket attacks, the city of Sderot today decided to reopen its schools. The schools were closed yesterday to protest the lack of security after some 30 Qassam rockets fired by Palestinian terrorists landed in the city over the weekend. City and school officials, as well as parents, complain that despite promises in the past, there is a dire shortage of shelters and protected rooms in the southern Negev town.
A newscast from Al Jazeera channel in Qatar. A Spanish court issued its sentence on what it called an Al-Qaeda cell in Spain. It sentenced Imad ad-Din Barakat to 27 years in prison for allegedly conspiring to carry out the September 11th attacks in the United States. It sentenced Taser Alaouni, an Al Jazeera correspondent, to 7 years in prison and fined him for allegedly cooperating with a terrorist organization despite the fact that he was declared innocent of belonging to the Al-Qaeda organization.
كما بدأت هذه القضية في المحكمة الإسبانية قبل أشهر بحشد إعلامي وأمني هائل.
Although this case in the Spanish court started months ago with large international media coverage and security, it ended in the same atmosphere with the Spanish police taking unprecedented security measures around the court. After the chief judge of the court made a statement about the general framework of the sentences and about the kind of measures they were taking based in large part on eavesdropping in on phone conversations, which he justified based on the nature of this case, making this necessary. The female judge read the verdict. Our colleague, Taser Alaouni, was sentenced to 7 years in prison, accused of cooperating with Al-Qaeda. 18 others were also sentenced to prison for varying years for allegedly being part of what is known as Abu Dada's network. 27 years was handed down to the Syrian Imad ad-Din Barakat Yarkus, also known as Abu Dada, for belonging to a terrorist organization and conspiring to kill civilians. He was also accused of making logistic preparations for the 9/11 attacks. Our colleague Taser met with his wife and children before the verdicts were made. Afterwards, his wife said that these verdicts were predetermined and that everything in the case had been politicized. The children were prepared psychologically to accept the fate of their father's absence.
وأن كل شيء هو مسيس في هذه القضية وتم تحضير الأطفال نفسيا لتقبل غياب والدهم عنهم.
This sentence is very unjust. Taysir and Al Jazeera have both been sentenced. Today, Al Jazeera has also been sentenced. They're trying to condemn Al Jazeera by condemning Taysir. We shall appeal the verdict until the last moment, until Taysir is proven innocent.
We understand that the appeal would be difficult and long. It will take at least 1.5 years to appeal. It will also be difficult to free Taysir on bail after this court sentence, but we will exert all efforts to achieve this.
The sentence of our colleague, Taser Alaouni, was received with shock and deep regret by the legal counsel that had monitored the case since the beginning. Perhaps appealing the case in the Spanish judicial court would open the door for a refutation in the European court. Al Jazeera expressed its shock and deep regret concerning the sentence of our colleague Taser Alaouni, demanding the Spanish court to release him. Following the sentence of our colleague Taser Alaouni, Al Jazeera released a statement that it considers the sentence an unjust and a dangerous precedent in the history of the profession of journalism. Al Jazeera confirms its continuous support towards correspondents and continuous defense of his professionalism and courage as a journalist. The channel also confirmed that it is consulting with Taser Alaouini's lawyer as well as with the legal team that is following his case, and it supports his efforts to appeal the sentence. While awaiting the appeal, Al Jazeera channel is asking the Spanish court authorities to immediately release our colleague on bail in consideration of his health condition.
Hello and welcome. May Shidja, a prominent anti-Syrian news anchor, was seriously wounded when her car exploded in Ghadir, north of Beirut yesterday, fueling fears of a slide into violence as the UN wraps up a probe into the murder of former Prime Minister Rafi Hariri. A hospital spokesman said her condition was now stable following the surgeries she undertook, while a French medical team was headed for Beirut to operate on LBC's star anchor woman. Protesters were due to hold a sit-in this evening in Beirut's central Martyr Square. May Shidja is a familiar face to Lebanese. She hosted a talk show earlier yesterday to discuss public fears of more violence ahead of the UN investigators presenting their report expected next month. A security source said the bomb weighed around 500 grams and was planted beneath Shidja's four-wheel drive. It exploded as she was getting in. Doctors said her left leg beneath the knee was blown off in the blast, which also set hair and clothes ablaze. Hotel Dieu Hospital, where she was treated, said in a statement that Shidja lost her left leg and left arm due to the blast, as well as suffering burns over her entire body. She was in stable condition in hospital. The Hariri family offered to fly skin grafting experts to Lebanon, while Saudi billionaire Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, an LBC shareholder, also offered his private jet to fly Shidja abroad for medical treatment. A series of explosions have rocked Lebanon in recent months. Shidja began reading the news on LBC, a channel that has long been critical of Syria's domination of Lebanon 20 years ago, in the midst of the civil war. Many Lebanese have blamed Damascus for the spate of killings since Hariri's murder, all of which have gone unpunished. Syria denies any role in them, although the UN inquiry has already led to the arrest of 4 pro-Syrian generals on charges of murder. Shidja, a supporter of the Anti-Syrian Lebanese Forces Party, was the second journalist to be targeted by such a bomb attack. On June 2nd, Samir Asid was blown up in his car outside his home in the Lebanese capital. Former Communist Party chief George Hawi was killed the same way on June 21st, also in Beirut. In an interview Shidja carried out for LBC just hours before the attack, she questioned fellow journalist Sarkis Naum on the possible involvement of Syria in the Hariri assassination. They also discussed international moves to isolate Syria and the prospects of regime change in Damascus. Sources close to Shidja said she was committed to independent and sovereign Lebanon and opposed the Syrian control over Lebanon until Damascus withdrew its troops in April after a 29-year presence. Shidja studied at the University of Lebanon's journalism faculty. She worked for Voice of Lebanon Radio before joining the LBC television channel, where she is a top news anchor and regular host of a political talk show.
The Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika confirmed that the Peace and Reconciliation Initiative is the only way out of the chronic crisis that has plagued Algeria for roughly 15 years. Addressing a large crowd of people in the Algerian capital city of Algiers, President Bouteflika condemned terrorism, describing it as a phenomenon that is more dangerous than occupation because the enemy is from within. People came from a number of municipalities such as Al-Baladiya, Mandia and Tubaza to hear the speech. His Excellency the President requested Algerian victims' families who suffered in the crisis for a long time to vote in favor of the Peace and Reconciliation Initiative. He said it is the only way to close the dark chapter of violence. In a message to victims' families of the national crisis, the President of the Republic of Algeria confirmed that love, peace and tolerance are the only prescription to remedy the Algerian problem.
المطلوب من الشعب الجزائري خيار صعب جدا. ما هو المطلوب؟
What is demanded of the people is a very difficult task. For the past 15 years, many women lost their loved ones and became widows. However, I am now very optimistic because we signed the Initiative of Peace and Reconciliation. For the past 15 years, the war on terrorism has continued. However, during these years, we have witnessed improvements and progress, and more improvements and progress.
جيت نطلب الأمر، جيت نطلب الإذن، قلت الأمر وهذا الأصح
I touched base with Algerian widows and women who lost their dearest sons on the Peace and Reconciliation Initiative. They asked me to vote yes on the accord. Moreover, I consulted with the orphans and asked for their forgiveness.
كذلك يسرحوني ويسامحوني عند ربي لأن قررت باش نصوت نعم وقررت باش نواجه الله تبارك وتعالى ونقول له لماذا صوت نعم.
I also asked God to direct me on the right path.
عنواني في الدستور.
This is why I signed the peace initiative. My title in the charter is the President, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, and the Defense Minister, and nobody can lecture me on war on terrorism.
اللي يعطيني درس بالنسبة لمكافحة الإرهاب ولا يقول لي قادرين ولا ما قادرينش. عرفت البلاد الاستئصاليين وعرفت الإسلامويين ودائما
I have always known, even when I was not in office, that Islamists and extremists do exist in our country. I have always been supportive of the national reconciliation. I've never and I will never change my beliefs.
يعاب علي أنني ما دفعتش كما ينبغي على المنكوبين نتاع الأزمة الوطنية.
I was criticized that I failed the people who had been the victims of many years of violence. Maybe I did not do enough to stop the pain and suffering of the people, but that was because my hands were tied. It wasn't deliberate.
موش تقصير على الإطلاق ولا رغبة في التقصير.
I was also criticized by the Islamists that I prevented them from participating in the political process. It is okay with me if the Algerian people see otherwise in the future. However, as of now, those responsible for dragging the country into many years of crisis will have no place in politics. And I say it clearly, clearly, and clearly.
بكل وضوح.
In Brussels, the Kurds in Turkey asked the European Union to bring the Kurdish problem to the bargaining table as they convene on the 3rd of October to negotiate whether or not to allow Turkey to be a member of the Union. The Second Kurdish International Conference that convened in the headquarters of the European Parliament urged Ankara to implement political reforms and to abide by the recommendations of the Copenhagen Agreement on Human Rights.
As the
meeting of the European Union in October 3rd nears to discuss whether or not to allow Turkey to join the Union, the Kurds in Turkey voiced their conditional support for such move. The Kurds urged Turkey to recognize their national and cultural rights, while the European Union demanded that Ankara must implement political reforms.
أعتقد أن ما أنجزته تركيا من بعض التغييرات المحدودة.
I believe that the political and legislative reforms which Turkey claims to have made have never actually been implemented. For example, Turkey persecuted Orhan Pamuk, a writer, and committed massacres against Armenians and Kurds. So much for political reforms.
The Kurds requested a new trial for their leader, Abdullah Öcalan, and demanded that Turkey must recognize the Kurds' right of autonomy in Diyarbakir, the symbolic capital city of the Kurds. The Islamic government of Erdogan offered to open a direct dialogue with the Kurds to discuss their problem, but the Kurds were cautiously optimistic about such initiative.
Some changes, as called for by the Turkish Prime Minister, must be made especially in regard to the Kurdish file. It is a positive step indeed. We are more optimistic than ever that we can resolve the Kurdish problem via negotiations and constructive dialogues.
The Kurdistan Labour Party declared a unilateral ceasefire with the Turkish government for 1 month, a move that was praised by the Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
A Kurdish diplomatic official confirmed that Ankara was reluctant to send an envoy to act as an observer in the meeting with the European Union, but the Turks changed their minds at the last minute. The government of Turkey, prior to the EU meeting, is in hot water because they must cut through the red tape of their traditional policy. Turkey must recognize the sovereignty of Cyprus on condition that, if not met, will pose an obstacle ahead of the European Union conference on October 3rd. The Turkish government fears that the implementation of the Copenhagen Agreement regarding the rights of the Kurds is the beginning of an adventure that will be very costly. As far as the Armenian massacre is concerned, it will be at the center of discussion of the Armenian conference that will convene at the end of this week.
The Lebanese Rural Heritage Museum is located in the mountains of Lebanon and reflects the Lebanese obsession with collecting antiques from the past as a way of reviving the heritage, getting in touch with memory and with the stories of the past. The museum consists of 3 rooms which were built in the 14th century. Gathered on its walls are a variety of antiques and traditional items that were used by the inhabitants of the village during that time.
وأزيائه التي كانت لدى سكان القرى في ذلك الوقت.
اقتناء الماضي بأدواته لا يشكل هواية لدى البعض لإحياء التراث.
Collecting antiques is a hobby for some to revive the heritage and present the simple life of the past. It is a way to revive memories of the ancestors and to get away from today's superficialities. This hobby, which illustrates the obsession of some Lebanese, pushed Ghandi Abu Diab to collect antiques and display them in a historic artifacts museum in his village, whose history goes back to the 16th century, located in the mountains of Lebanon.
تاريخه إلى القرن السادس عشر ميلادي.
التراث اللبناني أو التراث القروي هو تراث
The Lebanese or rural heritage is an authentic and rich heritage and is an art in itself. If every person or every artist had an old house that was 400 years old or more and had even a small interest or artistic talent, he could, I imagine, collect and take care of the heritage. Also, if he draws, does mosaic work, or knows how to carve, he could reflect on the heritage through sculptures, mosaic work, and sometimes poetry.
بيرسم أو بيعمل موزاييك أو بينحت أو شيء كمان بيقدر يحاكي التراث بأسلوب الرسم أو الموزاييك أو الشعر أحيانا.
القنديل العتيق، الجاروشة، المحراث، جرن الكبة، الطربوش.
An ancient oil lantern, a grinder, plow, jug, a hat, a clay pot, small mosaic stone portraits, a hearth, and other such items are all placed here in such a way that makes the visitor feel as if he is truly in a house from centuries past. As you enter, you are welcomed by an old man and woman dressed in traditional clothes, which some of the religious people continue to wear even today. This place that gathers the Lebanese rural heritage personifies the dreams and aspirations of some young artists. The question remains, will this heritage remain only as a tourist attraction, or will it enrich the knowledge of coming generations?
لاستقطاب السياح أم أن الأجيال القادمة ستستفيد منه؟ كارولين بعيني، قناة أبو ظبي، جبل لبنان.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.